everybody. I wanted to give you a brief rundown of the Java server pages in Chapter 31 of my book, Java for Programmers. We had a brief summary of the topics, and I thought I'd go through them for you. The basic idea is that servlets are something that you typically compile and then deploy using a WAR or a web archive to your servlet container, something like Tomcat, for example. Whereas JSPs can be written more or less as a script, very similar to PHP. You get to write your HTML, and then you can insert into it dynamic content. This gives you a compile output that appears when the page is first visited, and so it's used in conjunction with servlets. The JSP pages can typically be written with any text editor. Oftentimes it allows you to separate out programmers from people who really like to focus on content development, and the JSP system runs entirely on the server. JSP pages typically end in a JSP, and they look very similar in content to HTML files, except they have some extra stuff associated with them, extra tags. And when you first visit a web page, you get what a JSP page, you get an automatic compilation, and that converts into what's called a JSP servlet. An init method is called on the servlet. The service is invoked, and then subsequently you get much faster response. So initial visitation causes compilation, and sometimes if there's an error, the error output will look very cryptic to the customer. So Tomcat uses a JSP page. It compiles it into a servlet, then it compiles the servlet. Then there's an instance of the JSP servlet, and it executes the servlet just like you were executing normal Java code. So presumably you could consider it as writing in a higher level Java, because you've got a scripting language. You can let the JSP do all the work of a servlet, or you can write a servlet that does most of the work and passes the results to a JSP to create the resultant HTML page. What I'll do is give you a little demo of some of the Apache Tomcat installs I've got. This one's installed locally on my Mac, and we'd like to run a few examples for you. Let's try some of these JSP examples. This one is going to do some basic arithmetic, and here you can see the expression underneath and the result. These are tags that have been inserted into the HTML. So what we've got here is a table with a series of different tags on the left, and then the result in executing those tags on the right. And so now what you can see is that the power of the Java server page is that you can do a whole bunch of interesting and wonderful scripting. Let's take a look and see how that appears on. So now what we have, it looks sort of like basic HTML with a difference, and the difference is when you put in $1, it's actually a number, and $1 plus 2, that gets evaluated. Here with the backslash, that prevents evaluation, so you can see the literal directly. And so now you've got an opportunity to see mod and div and equals equals. These are all different kinds of operations. So then you can do some basic comparisons. Here's the comparisons inside of the dollar brackets, all part of the JSP, which you can directly edit. And here's the code that it looks like. And here again you can see these these things get evaluated. 1 is less than 2, 1 is greater than 4 over 2. It'll show it as false, I should imagine. Let's take a look. Basic comparisons. Yep, so that showed up as false. So these things got evaluated on the left, and the results of the evaluation are shown on the right. Let's try a couple more. I've got a number guessing game here. Let's see, it says, welcome to the number guessing game. I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. Let's try 50. Try lower. 25. Low. Try higher. Okay. So let's try 32. Higher still. So let's try 45. Try higher. 49. Try lower. Oh dear, I'm very bad at this. 47. Try higher. Hopefully it's 48. Yay, and only 7 tries. For some reason it always takes me 7 tries. Perhaps I'm not bisecting the area properly. So the number guess game is interesting because he's got this bean associated with it, which does the business logic, and he's imported. So this is a page directive, %@page import, and now I've got a JSP that says use the bean, give it an ID, and make reference to some sort of a fully qualified class name, and give it the scope of the session. So now I can proceed to use JSP set property, numGuess, and then I can use the tag in here, angle bracket %, and I can actually throw in a whole bunch of Java code. And if the numGuess is successful, congratulations, you got it. If there's a reset, we can call reset. Here, care to try again. We ask the question. numGuess JSP is the relative hypertext reference. And now here comes some more code. Welcome to the number guess game. And there's a form, a get method, and he says the parameter is guess, the type is text, and that will be used as input for the form when somebody clicks on the submit button, which will be over in here. And the value will be submit, and we'll be able to take their guess and process it as part of this form. Otherwise, good guess, but nope. Try numGuess.getHint, and so the hint should probably come in lower or higher or something like this. We're not sure exactly what it's going to be printing. And then it'll tell us how many guesses we've made so far. So the numGuess bean handles all the business logic in the back end, and we just format it. And now here's another form that says, what is your guess? And he puts the guess in, and you have to hit submit. So that's kind of fun. We made a game out of the JSP. Here's a bunch of information about the date. Let's see how we can get that. And so now we're going in and using some sort of dates.jsp calendar. So this is going to be a class called JSP calendar, and his property is the clock, and he's able to get the year, the time, the month, the date, all these other things that come in off of the clock. And clock is associated as an instance of the JSP calendar. So this JSP useBean makes an instance, and it has to have a constructor that takes no arguments. Here's something called Snoop. We can execute that, and we can look at all kinds of interesting information about the remote host, and maybe that information can be of some use to us. Here's how that works. We've got a whole bunch of dynamic stuff that can come through the so-called HTML filter, and it's going to use a request, which is an HTTP request, a session request. And we'll be able to get remote user if it's available, remote hosts, authorization types. These are the kinds of things that we can go through in some detail. Here's one called checkbox, and we'll try and check some apples and maybe melons and hit submit, and it tells you that you check these things, and you can see how they're submitted if you look at the page source. It looks like a series of inputs. Looks like normal HTML, but this HTML is generated by the JSP. Let's take a look at the JSP for the checkbox. And you can see that the JSP looks really rather different than the HTML we just saw. So now he's got a use bean foo, which is an instance of the package checkbox.checkTest, and we have foo, which is a property called fruit, some property that's able to be set from the parameter fruit. So apparently when somebody selects a fruit and hits submit, you're able to get the fruits that were selected. And then you can go through the fruits and do a filter and get all kinds of interesting and wonderful information about the fruits that somebody has selected. So that makes for kind of an interesting way in which to do your programming. It doesn't quite look like Java, and in fact it comes out like quite a mashup. It's Java plus tags, or HTML plus Java tags, and that's essentially the way I would characterize all of the JSP programming. Let's see if we can get back on track with the PowerPoints. So now we've seen some examples of servlets and some examples of JSPs. JSPs, they're scripting languages. Deployment, all you have to do is take the JSP and put it right into the intended directory, and then it will it'll compile automatically. Tomcat's got the ability to invoke the compiler. The scripting elements can have all kinds of regular Java code in them. They can have simple expressions. It's really good if you can do most of the business logic in the back end without the JSP, just because you want to be able to make sure that the business logic is bulletproof before you do your deployment. It's very tempting with JSPs to do deployment casually, to go in and surgically edit the files and just do your development right on the Tomcat container. But that's probably not best practice. Your Java statements are surrounded by the angle percent and percent angle, and all of the statements in there have to be able to compile without an error, or else you're going to have a very interesting error spit out on the screen, something you probably don't want to show the customer. If you just want a short expression, you can use angle percent equals, and then the expression will get evaluated. Normally, if you're in a servlet, you can get a print writer from the response, and then proceed to call out.println and print out your HTML. But with JSP, what you're doing is you're writing all the HTML straight as though it were in an HTML file, and then you insert your Java code. You can get a bit of a spaghetti, that mixed up scripting / Java code in there. If you're putting in lots of business logic into your JSPs, you're probably doing something wrong. Out.println is available. You can use that to generate HTML. That's sort of the servlet way. The spaghetti business, this is the time when people start getting deep into the Java programming. inside of their JSPs. And that's something we can explore. It's going to create quite the mess for most people to try and clean up later, but it might be okay for a quick prototype. You can define member variables, and you can define methods. You can have all kinds of regular classes you can define. The page directives are typically done at the beginning of the JSP. These things can do things like import. So if you use $@page import, that'll put that right at the top. And then you can import a whole series of different classes. And it will, during generation phase, create an output that looks like you've done a series of imports. So for code reuse, you can do an include. Includes will chain various JSPs with one another. So you could have some sort of a standard cascaded style sheet that you'd like to include for the entire web page. And then when people start to make use of this include, if there's one place where you want to change like the font or the background color, you can do it generically across all the pages inside of the web page. So that in that way, you can get some kind of consistency for your appearance. So here's a JSP include, and I find this to be perhaps one of the things that could really mess things up, because if you have a whole series of includes, one including something else, nested includes, it can take a lot of time to do the compilation. Things can go quite long during visitation time. So let's try a few more examples. There's red. So in this demo, we see the JSP taking a parameter, and the parameter comes in the form of the question mark name equals. So we can change the name to anything we like. Here we'll make it CR320, and then it'll render on the server and pump the scalable vector graphics back to the browser. And that uses SVG vector graphics, which comes from an API called Apache Batik. The source code for this example makes use of the value name. Right, there's the variable, and then you can proceed to parse that from the parameter list, and then whatever that name is, it gets passed into this function. And the function comes from one of the functions that's listed here in this href. And so what we've got is an opportunity to use the parameter line at the top with the question mark and then name equals, and then that gets passed in directly for us to be able to do manipulations. There's another aspect to this which is interesting, and it's the includes. We've got an include capability shown over in here. Take a look at this smiley face and see where it is relative to the code. If you look at the source code, you can see the smiley face appears right over in here after the includes for this HTML, and here's another include that comes in afterwards. The flush refers to the output stream, so it's asking you to flush out the output stream before this next tag comes in, so that you have a synchronous load for the includes. So this is a technique where you can start to cascade includes with one another. Things get a bit tricky, which is why we've got auto flush on as a page directive, so that we can make sure that the output streams aren't staying buffered, and that we don't have to hit reload in order to be able to see the differences or the changes. So then the question is, what happens when inclusion occurs? We get the include directive occurring at compilation time, but the final output doesn't happen until the output stream is flushed. Page maintenance becomes a little bit more tricky, and as a result, the includes aren't always going to behave as you might predict. Everything has to be sort of tested extensively. This is generally true, I think, with JSPs. JSPs, because the compilation happens at visitation time, you really have to test everything that you do, because when you have a compilation error, you get all kinds of stuff spitting out on the screen. Alright, so when requesting parameters, typically what you do is you use some sort of a form, and that'll give you a what they call a variable or parameter that's usually represented by a string, such as choice, which is given some value which is represented by another string, such as yes. And so this will be passed into the JSP. When the HTTP request comes in, you do get parameter choice, and it'll return the value, which will be yes. So this is just what happens in servlets. We see the HTTP request, and we generate the HTTP response, but typically in the request we get a series of different parameters and their values, so that we can proceed to dispatch to the correct method with the correct arguments. You can use the get or post method in your forms, and the action can be an arbitrary JSP name. When you're doing database processing, it's just the same as a servlet, only you've got to do your import. So here we're doing an import Java SQL at the head of our JSP, and then we can proceed to execute SQL statements. So there are a couple of objects that we get automatically in the JSP environment. Out is a instance of the print writer. So you can do out.println or out.print. You get the HTTP request, you get the HTTP response. There's even a session variable and an application variable. If you want to start doing scriptlets, what you can do is you can enclose them in the angle bracket %sign tags. That's going to be compiled into Java, and the scriptlets can write HTML using some out.println. So here we have an example where we go to the query string, we get some sort of data, and then we can use that data to output some sort of HTML. So if you have a scriptlet and it's got fractional pieces of HTML interspersed with the actual Java code, then you've got a mechanism in here to create what I would consider to be spaghetti code. This is really hard for people to maintain. So if your goal is to generate something that's not for Java programmers, then you've got a problem if you start to intersperse a whole bunch of Java in with the JSP and the HTML. So in this case, what you want to do is you want to move as much of your business logic as possible into the objects, the instances, and then your basic HTML code will reside presumably unpolluted by Java code, which would generally confuse an HTML author. HTML comments are different from JSP comments. JSP comments use the angle %dash, whereas HTML comments use the angle !dash. And I think we can run just a few more examples here. Let's see if we can find a couple. So let's see now. Here's a hello world. Let's see if we can get hello world to work. And here's one that uses a thing called the tag lib. And the tag library is a library of tags that you can create for yourself for later use. That's a rather more advanced topic, but here you can see where somebody has taken their tag and it says hello world, and presumably that expands into the hello world output. To see how that tag worked, you might like to look at something like this hello world simple tag, and it says do tag, and then he gives you some sort of an output that says hello world, and now you've got kind of a macro that you can use for substitution later. That might make things a little bit simpler if you have custom tags for people who are let's say non-Java programmers.